Hey everyone, and welcome to another Konoha Reviews. Today we review the highly anticipated and long-awaited Cyberpunk 2077. This game has been in the making for more than 8 years now, and pretty much gained legendary status after CD Projekt Red got more and more famous and praised for their increasing critical and financial successes of The Witcher 2 and 3. To some, The Witcher 3 was the best game ever made, and so the hype for their next project, Cyberpunk 2077, was gigantic. It of course also gained notoriety, after the initial trailer, featuring the girl with the blade arms, was pretty much the only trailer that the people had for a continuation of 4 to 5 years. But since the last 2 years, new announcements and info about Cyberpunk kept getting released, and the game finally came back on everyone's mind. CD Projekt Red was known to delay games often, and release them when they felt that the product was ready. Since they were their own publisher, there were no greedy corporate people like EA or Activision grabbing them by the leash and demanding an early publish. And so over the past year and a half, Cyberpunk got delayed multiple times again, but was then finally released on December 10th. Now, as I often do with my reviews, before I write and upload them, I do not watch or read other reviews, so that I can stick to my own opinion without being influenced by other sources. And so I have not really looked up any videos about it, but of course YouTube does recommend me some videos, and so I have seen some video titles, thumbnails, and headlines that there is quite a bit of critique on the game. Most notably, its buggy release. Now, I am playing the PC version, so that is what my review will be about, and though yes, we will also talk about the bugs in this review later, I have to say that the game runs really smooth for me. I have a 2060 and reach an average of 50 frames with everything on ultra except the ray tracing, and that is fine by me. However, I did also hear that if you are playing this on the PlayStation 4 or older Xbox, it's apparently an absolute nightmare. Now again, this review will be focused on the PC version, so I probably did not run into any trouble that the PS4 version had to deal with. There's a lot to discuss here, a lot to dissect, so let's begin, shall we? The game is very long, as pretty much all CD Projekt Red's games are. Many reviewers back in the day talked about The Witcher 3 having more than 100 hours of gameplay to offer, but I found that a bit exaggerated. I played and also reviewed The Witcher 3 and completed the main quests and almost all the side quests in about 80 hours, without also using fast travel. Now mind you, 80 hours is still very, very impressive and an incredible amount of time for a good quality game, which means you get your money's worth. But I wasn't sure where those extra 20 hours came from that people talked about. Now, Cyberpunk 2077 is supposed to be even larger, and around 150 hours if you want to absolutely do everything, and I tend to believe that, because it was one heck of a huge surprise to see the title screen of the game pop up after having played it for 12, and yes I repeat, 12 whole hours. Never have I played a game before where I have spent such a long time, more time than your average AAA game of 8 to 9 hours, and then only have scratched the surface of the entire story as I get introduced to the title screen. It was an incredible surprise, and once again, if you want bang for your buck when it comes to playtime, Cyberpunk 2077 has you covered, and it's easily worth those $60. But what about the graphics, the gameplay, and the story? Because the game can be however long it wishes, but it's not an engaging or interesting world, that long playtime might not seem like an attractive point. Luckily, I can tell you without rethinking it a second that Cyberpunk 2077's world and story are incredible. Absolutely fantastic. First off, I should say that I was really blown away by what I saw on the screen. I refused to watch any of the Cyberpunk Nightwire trailers because I was afraid it would spoil too much of the game. I had seen the initial trailer at the E3 and the first gameplay presentation, and knew I wanted to go into the game without seeing anything else. Maybe because of that, I was not prepared of all the visual epicness that appeared right in front of my eyes. I prepared to launch well by rewatching Blade Runner 2049 and Ghost in the Shell that very same day to get me in the mood. And I recommend everyone to maybe watch something cyberpunk-esque before trying this, because you will really feel like you are stepping in those worlds you see in those movies. But even better, since you can go and explore this world at your leisure. The game Cyberpunk, though of course made by CD Projekt Red, has its setting and lore based on the pen and paper game created by Mike Pondsmith. Now, the setting of Cyberpunk is not something he has created necessarily. That was a genre birthed by movies like the original Blade Runner, which mixed influences from Western and Eastern cultures in a futuristic city. The beautiful thing about that is that the East then took that genre and mixed and matched to give something back in the form of their own cyberpunk products like Akira, Ghost in the Shell, or anime that share influences of cyberpunk like Cowboy Bebop. The 80s aesthetics and punk mentality has always been something that stood out in the cyberpunk genre, as the worlds and settings were always grimy, dirty, and hopeless, against a background of huge buildings and neon signs, with corporations standing tall and controlling everything, also present in classic cyberpunk movies like RoboCop or Total Recall. And the cool thing about the giant world in Cyberpunk 2077 is that there are many different looking aesthetic districts, and some look straight up like Neo-Tokyo, or the city seen in Ghost in the Shell. And then another district looks more like LA from Blade Runner, or Detroit from RoboCop, or 80s Miami. There's really something here for everyone's taste of their favorite cyberpunk setting. Because the story and lore of Cyberpunk 2077 was created by Mike Pondsmith a long time ago and has been set in stone for many years, it feels very believable and deep, giving CD Projekt Red the baseline to create a very believable and lore-heavy world. And that is exactly what they did. At the beginning of the game, you create your own character like you do in other RPGs, though this is a first for CD Projekt Red. You actually have a lot of options, from your standard hair type or color, to even some very unconventional options like color teeth, penis size, or type of pubic hair. All these customizations does get appreciated, but since there are no cutscenes and everything is seen from first person, the customization does not have as much impact as you might initially think. After you have created your character, you get to select a background, which offers a very different opening mission for the first half hour or so, and will also influence certain dialogue choices you can choose from. The street kid background makes your character, for example, a bit rougher and has dialogue options to call people out. The corporate higher-ups have some dialogue options which show that they have a lot more financial knowledge to strike deals, and the free nomads, basically Cyberpunk's version of the Mad Max type people, know a thing or two about tinkering with electronics, giving you some dialogue options regarding that. Now I personally went with Nomad, and after seeing and comparing the other two beginnings with this one, I can wholeheartedly tell that the Nomad beginning is by far the best. I chose Nomad mostly because I wanted to have a little bit of a build-up. If I started outside the city, maybe at a trailer camp or something, I could experience that build-up and anticipation of heading towards that epic night city I could see at the horizon. And that is exactly what you get. Though you go there a lot sooner than I expected. But that is not necessarily what makes the intro of the Nomad background so good. Is that the intro actually starts and feels a bit like open world action games that we've already known and seen before, like Far Cry 5, Fallout 4, or Rage 2. You start out in a garage as a mechanic works on your ride, and you get into a vocal argument with the town sheriff. Aside from maybe some computer screens and other tech, the environments and characters look kinda like your normal trader redneck types you know from a game like Far Cry 5. The intro even has you climb a radio tower to establish a connection where you meet a certain contact. But then, when you finally cross the border into Night City and walk around there for the first time, you realize that the game tricked you for that first hour and now slaps you in the face as it throws all of this incredible visual spectacle towards you of how detailed and crowded the city is. And I took my sweet time with it too. I thought about maybe filming and uploading the first hour or two to my main channel, but in the end I decided not to because I wanted to completely immerse myself and be glad that I did not, because I played it very slow. I read everything, every datapad I came across, all of the awesome custom written news articles on the web. It all gives perspective and background lore to this believable world, and it is glorious. Within the city itself, I walk towards my destination, I want to say, probably around 90% of the time. I honestly can say that I probably used a car to move from point A to point B less than 10 times unless it was mandatory for a mission. And the reason why I did not use a car is because I wanted to experience and soak in all those details and atmosphere that was created here. Night City is an absolute marvel to behold. There's so much to see for those who pay attention. It already starts when you head out of your apartment and just look at how all the NPCs are behaving. Nowadays, it has become more common for open world games to have their NPCs do all kinds of animations to make the world feel more alive. but I think currently Cyberpunk takes the cake of having the most varied animations, probably even more than Red Dead 2. NPCs walking around with a coffee cup or their phone have become all too familiar, and though you can spot these types too, in Night City, you will see characters work on their laptops, stop at food stalls to eat, play cards with their friends, throw up after drinking too much, tagging walls with graffiti, playing guitar on couches or chairs, running across the street when the stop sign turns red, or having a smoke break. And I even saw a random homeless woman drop a can she was eating from on the ground and then licking it off the floor and scooping it back up in the can. And there are many more animations that really make it feel like the world is more alive than ever. Now you will still run into issues with these open worlds with the current tech, in that sometimes you will see 2 or 3 of the same looking NPCs stand near each other. But they have a great variety of hairstyles, skin colors, and clothes to avoid them all from feeling clones. I do have to say that the E3 trailer did have a lot more NPCs walk around, which is a bit of a shame that they turned that down. As you walk through the city, you will come across random events that help increase that liveliness even more, like policemen in uniform or hazard suits investing a homicide or hazardous incident. Random gangs starting a turf war as you walk past, giving you the freedom to join the fight or ignore it. The amazing thing about the world is how detailed it is in even the tiniest of locations. Go into a side alley and it is full of objects and even items you can loot. You would not expect the developers to pay the same attention of detail to some very obscure environments like those back alleys, underground tunnels, or backyards. But each of them are. There was one random house I passed that had all these sandbags stacked up in this yard and patriotic flags placed all over its walls and roof. There was nothing I could do there, just walk around and loot a few things, but nevertheless it made an impact on me because I understood the context from what I saw, the items that were placed there. Or a random obscure back alley that had a molding mattress, used beer cans, and a table with some drugs on it. Clearly someone lives there who is homeless and who has known better times. The cool thing too is that the world itself is built very vertically, more so than any other open world city game up to date. Sometimes there are 3 or 4 levels you can be on at an outside pavement. You can walk around on the road pedestrian level, head to the overhead pass, or head up another set of stairs to arrive at the rooftops, which are still as detailed as ever, and you can find cool things like a group of people holding illegal street fights or just something more passive, but nevertheless very believable details like a single chair with a table looking out over a nice view, clearly stating that someone likes to come here and enjoy the view while having a cold one. Or a roof that has a very tiny little greenhouse where they grow some greens with the little resources that they have. I remember critics praising a game like The Last of Us 2 for its environments making sense and you were able to pick up things about it just from the environmental storytelling. And this game does exactly that too. Areas make sense despite this being a fictional sci-fi city. If you look at how things are arranged, it is all logical. I came across a random melee vendor that was located in a very small dojo/gym that was on the 2nd floor of a building. When I looked at how it was designed, you could clearly see that this is where the customers could wait and drink some sodas from the vending machine. Then that over there was the working out room, and the changing rooms were over there, and then indeed, like any gym should have, the shower was not too far from it. Having details like this, and all that time and effort being put into creating such a believable environments, results in you indeed believing that this is a world where these NPC characters live and breathe in. And the game has a surprising amount of indoor environments you can enter and explore without a single loading screen. Many other open world games, with the exception of maybe Red Dead 2, do offer indoor environments in open world games, but they maybe consists of 1 or, if you're lucky, 2 separate rooms. Many different indoor locations in Cyberpunk 2077, even just random ones that don't offer any main missions, have multiple rooms but also very often multiple floors to explore. And I'm very happy to say that the game lets you explore those areas to your heart's content, both with the main or side missions. In one of the main missions early on, you head towards a club run by the Moxies, a gang of working girls who look out for one another. Your main objective is to sit at the bar and meet a contact, but if you want, you can look around as long as you want to talk to people and loot stuff. You can even head up to the 2nd floor, go backstage, head to the DJ booth, the roof, or the toilets, which even the toilets offered some interesting displays, as I walked into a guy helping his girlfriend who was sick and too drunk to stand on her own 2 feet. I'm not kidding in that I say that some of these indoor environments are more detailed and bigger than some levels in AAA games that are just linear action games with a loading screen in between each level. The aesthetics and looks of the city overall is just really my jam. I cannot stop loving it, and even after 40 hours, I would still stand still and look around me to take it all in. If you like cyberpunk style, or just sci-fi cities in general, this is your absolute wet dream right here. I never really considered myself a cyberpunk fan, but I did know that I really love the aesthetic of cities like in Mass Effect, like the Citadel, or Coruscant in Star Wars, which of course is very much inspired by Blade Runner. As I said, I never sprinted on the streets and took my time walking from point A to point B, and even, and I know I'm going to sound like an absolute lunatic when I say this, I stopped more often than not in front of stop signs when they were turned red before crossing the road. Now, not because I wanted to roleplay so badly, but because it gave me an excuse each and every time to look around and just take in all the atmosphere. Just looking to the right and seeing your entire horizon being obscured by giant corporate buildings and neon signs is something magnificent to behold. Time and time again, when I looked at the skyline and saw all those giant buildings going on and on, was something I had never witnessed before on this scale. In a way, you are really and truly transported to another world, and I love it. In a way, with GTA 5, The Witcher 3, and Red Dead 2, steps were made to make the environments more alive and believable, transporting you to that place and make it your playground. But GTA is, besides the different names, based of course on real locations like New York or LA, making it a bit more grounded, and though it's awesome to explore those environments, it does not fill you with awe and wonder. The Witcher is much more a medieval fantasy, and Red Dead is of course the Age of the Cowboy, two settings I simply don't have a whole lot with. But huge metropolis settings is something I really love, and therefore it's what makes me tick to become invested in this environment and world. There have of course been cyberpunk style games in the past, and there are some really good ones like Deus Ex and Observer, but none of these offer a huge free open world to explore like this does. I am not kidding in that this game world in Cyberpunk 2077 is probably in my top 5 favorite game worlds of all time. And even now, I'm still not done exploring it, and cannot wait to dive back in and see what is around the next corner or up the other stairs. It kinda pains me when I see friends of mine or Let's Players on stream sprint past everything, missing those awesome details that not only the level designers, but also the artists put into here. From the various graffiti or stickers on random walls, to the magazines or LP covers, to the many different ads on the signs or ad videos on the TV screens. It is all customly made for this world and suits it. And those again in their own right tell stories and add context to the overall experience with what little they can. I saw a video commercial of a food product that contained 70% real meat, meaning that in this time and age, actual meat has become quite scarce. Products in the stores or vending machines, like fried ants, give a glimpse of how people get their protein in the future. And there's also a nice little note commenting on this on one of the data pads, saying that people still don't feel comfortable enough to eating worms, so they have to resort to the more expensive produce of cricket-based protein foods. The art design for the commercials is great, though often very outrageous. There's nothing subtle about it, and they definitely don't shy away from gore and sexual innuendos, but then again, there's nothing subtle about the cyberpunk genre in general. The music in the game is great too, and you will often hear it from other sources besides riding in your car. Head to a street market or overhead plaza and you will hear the various songs especially created for this game play throughout. And they are excellently produced and vary greatly from genre. From dirty grind and industrial metal, to raunchy techno and hip-hop, to even some quirky Japanese pop music. It's not music that I would necessarily love in real life, but just in this setting it feels so right, and I caught myself head bobbing to various songs multiple times throughout. So I think I've by now conveyed how much I adore the game world and the aesthetics of it. If one were to look at the graphics from a technical standpoint, you can say that it's not the most cutting edge, especially when it comes to its random NPCs. They kinda look like PS3 models, but it's all very serviceable, and in this case, it's style over matter. Other details like water are less detailed than games like The Witcher 3, and the same goes for the textures. But when it comes to the graphics stylistically, it is absolutely cutting edge and top notch. But what about the game itself? Let's finally dive deeper into what the game actually offers you in terms of gameplay and mechanics. First of all, As they were offering more and more trailers for the game, a certain mass appeal was created surrounding it. The Witcher 3 of course had received massive good reviews and praise, but was at its core still a super hardcore and sometimes a pretty unforgiving RPG. You often had to prepare for a big battle with a monster and buy potions and buffs before heading into battle. It was a real game for the gamers, not your average FIFA and Battlefield player. And so I had a tiny bit of fear that, also with Cyberpunk being a first-person shooter/action game, it would become a dumbed-down casual experience. And let me just tell you that I'm very, very happy that this is not the case at all. It is still an incredibly hardcore RPG with lots of different mechanics, lots of different playstyles, and a lot, and I do mean a lot, of dialogue and story you need to sit through. And where some might find that a negative point, I cannot stress enough how much I love that since I'm such a story nut. Though the main story missions do offer the longer and often also more visually impressive action bits, they also have many sections where you just talk to various characters to progress the story. It is not uncommon for you to just talk for 15 or 20 minutes. I remember that it was a critique by some with Red Dead 2 of just how much dialogue and talking there was in that game, but as said in that review, I was also just a big fan of that since it gives lore, context, and background stories to the various characters, and that's the same with Cyberpunk here. I also do have to say that I obviously chose many of the different optional dialogue choices to give even more background, which did lengthen those conversations significantly. I actually do think that the game might be criticized by some casual players who might think that there's too much talking and not enough action in some segments, but I could not disagree more. The game also has some pretty slow, in-depth mechanics like the blade dances, where you plug into a net, and it's comparable to when you check video feed of something that happened before. One can move around this recording freely and scan multiple properties with even different bases like visual feedback, temperature feedback, or audio feedback. It's not super complicated or complex, but it's also not your run-of-the-mill casual experience, and though some people might be turned off by this, I was really invested. There will be multiple times where you will do these so-called blade dances, and it never reaches the amount to where it becomes repetitive, since there's often a lot of time in between these sections. You meet so many interesting different characters, like Jackie Wells, your partner in crime, and his mother, his girlfriend Misty, your personal Ripper Dog Victor, female netrunner T-Bug, or the hacker Lucy, the mysterious Evelyn Parker, fellow nomad Panem, and a whole bunch of other colorful characters, each with a distinct and unique personality. And oh yes, Keanu Reeves as Johnny Silverhand is glorious too. The character he plays is actually quite a big douchebag, and it was interesting to see Keanu Reeves actually portraying such a jerk. I do sometimes feel he's a bit too much of a one-note hit with how he behaves so anarchistically all the time, but you don't constantly deal with him. The story segments with all these characters during the main story are beautifully motion captured. Their character models themselves are also way more detailed than the average pedestrian, since they have, as said, great animations and good facial expressions. For those who do want to have some action, the game has you covered too, and not only by those action set pieces you come across in the main story. The world map is, as you've come to expect, littered with landmarks and icons of things you can do. Now I have to say that I did prefer Red Dead 2's approach of not littering the map with icons, but to have events and side missions occur dynamically by having things happen along the path as you rode by. But with Cyberpunk, you have your standard icons everywhere, and besides the side missions, there are also these police reports of undergoing criminal activities. These are some fun, super small missions with action for the people who probably want to get that quick fix and fight something. In the beginning, I actually thought these criminal activities were randomly generated events, but they are not. They are actually handcrafted small missions, and you get a proper mission complete in your journal as well when you finish them. They start out really small, with maybe 2 punks looting a homeless guy they killed under a bridge and you having to deal with them. But as you play the game more, you do get to have larger confrontations with gangs that do shady things at a parking lot, at the docks, in the desert, back alleys, or on rooftops, etc. These small missions always involve you taking out the enemies, whether lethal or non-lethal, and then grabbing an item to complete it. It's very simple, and though these battles and confrontations themselves don't vary that much, since they are handcrafted, you do get across some varied scenarios and situations if one were to look a bit closer. In the desert, for example, I came across a group of thugs that had executed a group of civilians in a row, and after dispatching myself of the thugs, I came to find out that these were refugees who were stopped at the border. Another time, I came across a group of punks who were looting a garage full of corpses. When I read the different data pads on the dead bodies, I came to find out that their party had been set up in this garage, evident also by the strobing disco lights still flickering everywhere. This apparently was some sort of illegal rave and drug party set up for rich kids, and the patriotic, corporate-hating punks heard of this and decided to slaughter them, a la the movie The Purge. It's really these handcrafted situations that make it to where these battles gain a bit more variety. But even then, it did make me think about it, because there are so many of these criminal activity missions, and I still have not done them all, that it would not surprise me if some people might find them repetitive, since it's you going over there and killing all the enemies over and over and over again. It did give me a bit more perspective, in that what might really add to this is the overall game world or setting. A game I actually found a bit boring was Death Stranding, where you need to do the same fetch and deliver requests over and over and over and over again. Yet that game gets a lot of praise by many people, and some say that the immersiveness and mysteriousness of the environment of Death Stranding helps with that. I unfortunately thought that the environment, except for maybe the first 6 or 7 hours, was very empty and lackluster. But with Cyberpunk, I cannot get enough of the setting and world. And so it might indeed be true that the most important thing here is the setting, which fuels my willingness to do all these quests that are in essence the same. And what about the action itself then? I think that the action in Cyberpunk offers is good, but nothing out of the ordinary. You have a large amount of various weapons that you can use, from melee weapons like katanas, knives, steel pipes, crowbars, and baseball bats, to guns like pistols, revolvers, assault rifles, shotguns, pulse rifles, sniper rifles, and also heavy machine guns that you can only pick up and hold on to instead of putting it into your inventory. The melee action is satisfying, though can feel a bit jerky in terms of animations. Some of the weapons feel really awesome to use, like the katana or heavy hammer, where a heavy attack just bludgeons the enemy's heads to a bloody pulp or ripping off limbs. Same for the samurai sword, where you slice and dice in very satisfying animations as you decapitate and split enemies in half with gory combat. But then animations when you use something like the baseball bat or steel pipe feel a bit lacking and do not convey the same visual splendor, whereas an old game like Condemned can definitely show that melee combat with those tools can still be visibly very great. The gun combat feels also really good, though I had my doubts in the beginning a bit. I dislike the Borderlands look of seeing numbers above the enemy's head whenever you hit them. Luckily, you can turn this off in the options, and that was the first thing I did after I had my first encounter with the enemies. Now, since it uses this system of applying damage to each shot, there is of course a certain fear of enemies becoming bullet sponges, as is definitely the case in games like Borderlands and that god-awful Wolfenstein game of last year. I am playing the game on normal, and in the beginning, I did think they felt a bit bullet spongy, but as I played more and more, I have to say that it doesn't feel like that anymore. It was mostly because of how weak and crappy the beginning weapons were that it felt bullet spongy, and later on I got an awesome assault rifle, and the enemies would go down with 3 or 4 hits more often than not, which is comparable to something like Call of Duty. I noticed the bullet sponginess the most with the 2-barreled shotgun, where sometimes you unload 2 shells into enemies from close range and they still live. That is also why the shotguns are some of my least favorite weapons. But the great offer of different weapons assures that there is something there for anyone, and the game really encourages you to experiment since you get to fight in so many different situations. An open desert environment of course encourages much more to use the awesome sniper rifles in the game, rather than a shotgun or light machine gun. And some of the snipers are just absolutely incredible, and landing those headshots often guarantees you a one-hit kill, so in all honesty, the bullet sponginess I was worried about at the beginning melted away very soon. Now you might have to deal with it a bit more on the higher difficulties, but even then, the weapons like snipers should still feel really like they pack a punch like they do in other shooters. There's also a surprising amount of physics-enabled action during the shootouts. When you walk through the city, you cannot really interact with many of the objects like chairs, tables, boxes, etc. But whenever you shoot it, it does react, and since of course during shootouts multiple bullets are flying everywhere, it can be quite spectacular. Wooden rails splinter everywhere, concrete pillars burst open like in the Matrix, and papers on desks fly into the air like a John Woo movie. The action never became boring or unimpressive to play and look at. The main story quests you do in the game are very lengthy and are set up in such a way that sometimes it can feel like quite the roller coaster ride that just keeps going and going. I'm not kidding that when I say that some of these main story bits go on for 2 or 3 hours. Now, it's not entirely all one mission, but instead multiple missions that flow into one another very fluently. One quest has you, for example, look for a disappeared escort girl, and so you first head towards the bar that you met her, after which you are sent to visit her workplace. You head over there and collect details and info on her disappearance. You manage to find your next clue, or destination, and then head over there to a doctor who had done some work on her. You talk more to him, and then head towards the market where you find new info, etc., etc. Though what I described just now feels like you follow a narrative very fluently, which is indeed true, they are in actuality multiple quests that follow each other up. There's plenty of room for you to take breaks in between and let you do side missions. Now, these main quests are sometimes very tightly orchestrated and scripted, sometimes even feeling like a non-open world single-player game, which maybe by some can be seen as a negative point since they want the openness like in The Witcher. But I think it's told in a narrative and orchestrated in a way that's still very engaging and fun to experience. Another mission has you head outside the city and help a fellow nomad to act out her revenge so she can help you with something. The actions and steps you have to take are very tightly scripted, but I was enjoying her performance and the story and dialogue very much. And luckily, there is still a lot of choice involved, and having certain situations can end very differently, either in a confrontation or not, or even a third option you did not see coming. Even entire boss battles are skippable by performing certain actions like killing them during a dialogue opportunity. Or me trying to free an innocent gang member by looking for a key, only to find something with a button which I press, and it detonates the collar around the innocent guy's neck. Whoops. And so the main story quest will send you all over the map, from inside the city to outside, where you will do lots of talking and lots of shooting. Then what about the side quests? Well, they are of course in the game too, and offer once again a vast variety. When one were to take in all of the side activities you could do in the game, there are actually various levels within that too. The earlier mentioned crime activities are, for example, one of those side activities, but I don't really count them as proper side missions. There's no intro, no real story that gets thrown in your way at the beginning, and it's just up to you to just head over there and clear the area out. Then besides those, you have certain gigs. These are yellow question marks littered all over the map that offer various missions that pretty much always get introduced in the same way. Dependent on which district you are currently in, a so-called fixer will call you, briefly explain the situation, and then send you a document with more details. Having these gigs always starts out like this is a bit of a shame in my opinion. In The Witcher 3 you also had a ton of side content, both large and small. But even with the small quests, you had sometimes some really unique moments where you get introduced to the situation through a well-written piece of dialogue or conversation. Here, it's just always your fixer talking to you and reading the document. And the gigs can differ from heading to an abandoned apartment to look for stolen medicine, or retrieving certain files for a divorcee husband to get back at his ex-wife, or take out a psycho who's holding up at the top of a club where he creates snuff films of kidnapped girls. Or other times you need to head into a motel, look for a person who is targeted by a gang, and escort him to safety. Despite my critique of how these missions are introduced, their design are more often than not done very expertly, and in the spirit of classics like Deus Ex, which is a game I love very much. And this goes for many of the other side missions too, but in the spirit of Deus Ex, most of the time you have multiple ways of getting into places or acquiring things. One of the gigs has you retrieve something from a laptop while a Russian immigrant and his lover are still in that apartment. You can head in there by sneaking in through the front and trying to hide and maneuver around them. But if you go into another door, you come to a small roof. There's a machine on here, which if you activate it, will rise a platform so you can head towards the floor above their home and sneak in that way and find the laptop via a route where you don't even have to bother with them. And then there's still even a third option where you head into another apartment, then head towards the balcony and climb from there onto the balcony belonging to the Russian and sneak in that way. And I believe you can also still just head in there and take them out if you wish, since the stealth is almost never necessary, though you will get paid a little bit less. These side gigs can still feel pretty small, but also sometimes do leave an impact, due to the great writing and setup of the mission. One of the side gigs has you head into an apartment where an ex-veteran has stolen important medicine from corrupt doctors since he is suffering from horrible PTSD in his implants. The medicine he stole does not work, so they are useless to him, but he's still very startled when he sees you enter his home. You have your classic choice here of either taking it by force by killing him or convincing him that you can have it. I managed to convince him, and after I grabbed the medicine and headed out of the apartment, I heard a single gunshot. I headed back into the apartment, and he had shot himself, falling to despair since his final plan of medicine had failed as well. It actually did leave an impact, despite being such a small mission. And I love that the game is not black and white, but still keeps that grey line like they do with The Witcher. Though I have not done all the side gigs and all the side quests yet, there doesn't seem to be many side quests that come close to some of the most memorable side quests in The Witcher 3, like the Red Baron, but also the serial killer quests in the big city. So that's it for the side gigs. They are quests that go a bit deeper than the criminal activities, but still definitely feel like side activities rather than whole stories. But then you get to the side stories, and these are the other yellow exclamation marks on the map, and these are proper missions where you head to a person and they tell you their problem, which you can then help them with. Many of these quests are still a bit standard, with for example driving a certain person somewhere, finding certain vehicles, driving a package somewhere, or helping a person to beat up some thugs or save someone they love. So, in terms of what you do in the missions, it's not always that original, but it's more the context and story of the missions that make it interesting. The same can be seen with a game series like Yakuza, where the side missions are often very fetch quest-ish, or simple battles. But it's the absurdity of the situation or story that makes those side missions so entertaining. The same can be said for Cyberpunk 2077. You come across, for example, a guy played by one of my favorite YouTubers, Jesse Cox, and his character has a bit of a problem down under. You need to get him to a Ripper dock to fix his junk. The mission itself is a simple drive a person from A to B. But all the while this is happening, he is screaming in pain about how his dick is on fire and smoking. It's really funny and entertaining. Other times you need, for example, to collect several taxis that have been lost throughout the city. The taxis belong to a company that relies on AI self-driving cars, and these cars' AI have gone rogue. Where you might first think you will simply go around town collecting the vehicles, you get in various absurd situations, with one AI being afraid of flamingos and ordering you to go out and destroy flamingo statues in the neighborhood. You have your standard street brawl questlines here too, like you always have in The Witcher, but it's still as fun and varied in here too. You will get sent all over the city in different districts to fight different opponents in hand-to-hand combat in varied situations. The first fight will be against a pair of identical-looking fellows on a rooftop surrounded by cheering fighting fans, whereas later you will fight against a sleazy ex-veteran under a bridge who is full of himself and even attacks you with his gang after you beat him. The game also counts the buying of various vehicles throughout the game as side missions, though I would disagree with them on this. Much like the other open city games, you can search around and purchase all the vehicles. You also even have street races as side missions. I can remember they had some type of those mechanics in games as old as the first Mafia, where you collect all the different vehicles. But as mentioned earlier, because I find the world and the setting of this game so awesome, it actually gets away with some things I would normally not care about that much. I actually do look around the map now and then to see if a vehicle is on sale nearby so I can add it to my collection. If this was GTA or some other game where I would get realistic looking cars, I probably would not spend as much time doing so. Now as you do these missions, you will of course be rewarded with experience and level up your skills, attributes, and perks. And since I stated earlier that this game luckily still goes for that hardcore RPG approach, I can also happily say that the leveling mechanics and experience is deep and very satisfying. You have 5 basic attributes. You can level up one of them with each level up. They are your standard body, which adds more health, melee damage, stamina, etc. with each level, and other attributes are, for example, coolness, which adds resistance in each level up, or reflexes, which adds melee weapon damage or assault rifle damage. Then within those basic attributes, there are multiple tech trees which you can spend perk points on that will level up very specific things, like for example move 10% faster while crouched, or dodging will not drain stamina. There are a ton of options to upgrade, though the options themselves do still feel like a bit standard, with things like gain health regeneration inside or outside of combat, or gain movement speed for a short while after executing an enemy. The amount of customization and leveling does get appreciated and is very awesome. But then you can even still independently level up certain attributes by your actions in the game world. If you run a lot, or use blunt weapons during fights often, your athletics will level up and unlock new perks you can spend points on, but also will be rewarded by a small buff each time you level up one of those attributes through your gameplay actions. The first time you level up athletics, for example, you'll be able to carry a bit more equipment before becoming encumbered. I'm a big fan of this leveling system, as it has also been in other games like Oblivion or Skyrim, where the way you play dictates the attributes that get upgraded. If you use a lot of stealth, logically, your stealth tree will be upgraded. If you use the bow and arrow a lot, your archery skill and tree will be upgraded, etc. Cyberpunk handles it the same way, and it's really great because you can decide how you want to play the game and see immediate results and rewards through your skill upgrades. Lastly, I want to talk about one gameplay aspect we have not yet talked about, and that is the stealth/hacking mechanics. Since the mission structure can often be compared to something like Deus Ex, it comes to no surprise that you can use stealth to clear the missions most of the time. Though I'm not necessarily the biggest stealth fan there is, I've always liked the stealth in Deus Ex since you have such an open environment to move in different angles, and the same counts for this game. You can either try and take everyone out stealthily, or you can just time it right and sneak past them, or maybe find a hidden door or other entry point and skip them altogether. What helps with this is the ability to hack. If you turn on your scanner and point it at things like cameras, turrets, or enemies that have cybernetics in them, you can hack them on the spot and use them to your advantage. And this is hacking done right. Watch Dogs often tries to make the hacking seem engaging and varied, but unfortunately fails on that point, whereas Cyberpunk succeeds and offers many different hacking abilities, of which many are very useful. Hacking will cost RAM, and depending on what augment you have on you will decide how much RAM your character can use before you have to wait for a cooldown. Different hacks cost different amount of RAM, but one of the hacks you can do, which costs no RAM, will lower the RAM requirement, meaning it's very useful to save up valuable RAM so you can do many different hacks one after the other. Now some hacks are your typical ones, like turn off a camera, open an automated door from afar, or turn on a lamp or TV to distract enemies. But then there are more interesting hacks, like taking over a camera so you can see the room from its perspective so you can hack other things or people you cannot see from your character's current position. Now I do believe that they also do this in Watch Dogs, however. But what they definitely don't do in Watch Dogs are all the viruses and hacks you can do on the people themselves. You can temporarily make them blind so you can sneak past them or towards them to take them out. You can keep them from moving and pinning them to the ground or overheating their tech to have them receive damage. Another option is to jam their weapon so they cannot fire with it for a few seconds. It's very cool and a lot of options are available, and I've used these different hacking options a lot, though mostly, I should say, during the stealth sections. So by now, I hope you have realized that I absolutely adore this game. There is so much to love, and though it might not be a huge step forward for gaming in general, or do something drastically new in terms of gameplay, I do think it's a step forward in how detailed it portrays a game world like this. The real main character and star of this game is its world, which in a way is the accumulative result of all the people at CD Projekt Red working together to shape this world, since it stands due to its artists, its animators, its level designers, and its storytellers. But other than some critique points that I have with the game, well, I did say we would talk about the bugs of the game. But before that, I just want to mention a few tiny complaints or improvements that could have made the game even more amazing. These are not really heavy critique points, but simply minor pet peeves. One thing I found a bit annoying was that I did not see a clear icon on the data pads you find around the world as if I had already read them or not. I could be mistaken, but I thought that The Witcher 3 had a system like that, where there would be a yellow mark besides the book icon if you had not read it yet. If you did not see that icon, you knew you had already read it and would not have to bother reading it again. One other thing that I think could be an improvement is having more options at your disposal when you hack into a computer. Many other games like Deus Ex, but also Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, have great computer interaction where you can often hack and bypass security doors, retrieve quest items, and more. With Cyberpunk, you mostly can read emails and turn off security cameras or turrets, and though that is great, it very rarely gives you more options than that. It would be great to reward those who explore, or make their way through a building stealthily, to find a computer terminal and perform an action that really helps them continue towards their next objective, rather than just to turn off the camera, which is even more effective if you just quick hack it. In games like Vampire Masquerades, it was often a legit strategy to find a computer terminal and hack into it if your other skills were not high enough to, for example, lockpick it or force a certain door open. Then the final thing, it's not really a complaint, but I believe they said that they were going to implement this into the game, but I guess they had to take it out, is that you have a lot of customization when it comes to your implants in terms of language. There's a lot of different languages spoken in the game, which is very cool. People speak Spanish, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, French, Russian, etc. And I remember reading somewhere where if you did not have the right implant installed, that the game would not translate said sentences to English. But from the get-go, you already see all the foreign text being translated on the spot, and I thought that was a bit of a pity, since it could have been really cool if you headed into Japantown or an area where the Russians were active and realized it might benefit you from purchasing cyberware that lets you understand the languages they were speaking. Cool thing too, of course, is that if you are, as the player, are Russian, Japanese, or Hispanic, then you have no problem understanding what they said and could avoid spending money on a purchase like that. I also wish there was a little bit more interaction with the NPCs on the streets. You can literally walk up to every vending machine and grab a burrito or a drink, but you cannot really interact with the NPCs you see on the street. Yes, you can talk to them, but many will say something very random and sometimes something that it's not really appropriate at all for the type of character model it's portraying. Something simple as being able to buy a hot dog or a burger from the many stands would have been great. Red Dead does this really good, where you can say hi to every NPC and they interact accordingly and gives you a random greeting back that fits for that moment. Now, it is true that there are places in Cyberpunk where you can shop and order food and drinks, but instead of ordering it straight from the person who works there, you go into a menu, need to manually drag or add the food item to your inventory, and then if you want to consume it, you have to go into the menu again or use a shortcut. A simple order and quick biting animation or drinking animation at the bar or food stand would have made a big difference. Again, it's not really a complaint and simply a wish to just add a little bit more liveliness and role-playing and interaction to the game world. Other games have already done that, so I wish Cyberpunk would have done that too. And those are my critique points, which are very tiny in comparison with how awesome the overall experience is. In my opinion, there's something to like here for everyone, except for those who do not like RPGs or for those who simply do not like the Cyberpunk style. But let's now finally talk about the bugs, because I know that is a point that a lot of people want to know about after all the headlines spoke about how buggy the game is. So yes, I ran into some bugs and more than once or twice. And I do have to admit that in the first few hours, I was very afraid that the entire experience would be like this. But I've spent roughly 45 hours into the game and have not encountered a single game-breaking bug, luckily. I did at a point decide to make a list of bugs I did encounter, since you can hear what to expect a bit of what kind of bugs you are dealing with. During those 45 or so hours, I had sounds emitted from my gun when firing from a vehicle once, I had pedestrians slide over the floor or T-pose, my own character on 2 occasions did not display hair or clothes when looking into a mirror, and it happened twice where a weapon info screen got stuck on screen until I reloaded the game. I had 3 or 4 times where one particular subtitle line by Keanu Reeves got stuck and displayed the entire time. I had my health bar disappear multiple times. I had one time where an introduction quest dialogue was not audible, nor were the visual subtitles. And the worst bug I got was a gun glitching through Jackie's head during an emotional scene, which, rather than give me the feels, made me laugh really hard, and also a fight that glitched out and made all the enemies instantly disappear and instead spawn a whole bunch of civilian NPCs. Finally, throughout those 45 hours, I had one crash, but luckily only 5 minutes or so were lost due to how good the autosave is. Now here's the thing, yes, that's quite a lot of bugs. Some are even pretty annoying since they required a restart or a reload, but as I said, none of them were game-breaking, except I guess the crash, and in the end, it did not diminish how much I enjoyed playing the game or being in that world. Now I do think that the score should be lowered a bit because of all those bugs, since it's simply sloppy, and I think that the wisest thing still would have been to delay the game a month or two. I realized that you would have once again crybabies who would get really upset or do something stupid like threaten the developers. But I think the buggy state of Cyberpunk will be a legacy that will hurt for quite a while. It's definitely doable to fix it over time since we've seen it happen with games like No Man's Sky, but that only occurred after several years. I also have to say that I looked at some of the early footage of the Let's Players who got a review code, and it seemed that their bugs were a lot more severe, like seeing their own headless body within the car, or having certain NPCs have half their bodies disappear. Now currently, I still have not completed the game yet. As I said, I have around 45 or so hours into it, if I am to believe those stories about that the game is 150 or 170 hours to complete. It means that I still have over 100 hours to spend in this game, and I cannot wait to return and play and discover more. There's still so much to do and so much I have to discover. I still have to find and buy more cars. I have still more thugs and punks to beat up at the various criminal activity spots, more side quests and gigs to complete, weapons to craft and upgrade, skills to level up, and main story missions to beat. Now, even though I have not completed the game yet, and there's still a lot to do, I have done and experienced a lot and feel that 45 hours is a very good indicator to do a solid review and convey if the game comes recommended or not. Because even if the game suddenly puts a horrible Mass Effect 3 ending or whatever towards you, then it still makes it that the first 45 hours were so awesome and great that the game itself is still amazing. The same counts for The Witcher 3, which took me 80 hours, but I could have told you the exact same review at the 45-hour mark as I did with the 80 hours. So do I recommend Cyberpunk 2077? Abso-freaking-lutely. Maybe it was because I did not watch the Night Wires and therefore was not prepared, but for me, Cyberpunk blew me away and exceeded my expectations. It's even better than what I thought it would be. It's one of the most detailed and awesome gaming worlds out there, and it's so great that for the first time in these open world games, it makes me want to explore every inch and do all of the side content it has to offer. For the first time in an open world game, I don't mind doing 10 or 12 different side activities before continuing with the main story. It's an absolute marvel, and a new, though not huge, step in open world/city games. Even with the many bugs, it did not dampen the experience and always made it to where I wanted to boot the game up again and be in that world whenever I was off my PC. The few minor complaints I have are more improvements of life things like better visibility if you've read something or not, or having more interaction with the NPCs at things like food stalls, etc. It's just an absolute amazing achievement, and the ultimate game for those wanting to explore a world like they've seen from Blade Runner or Ghost in the Shell. In the end, Cyberpunk 2077 gets a 9.2. It's an absolute masterpiece. I will say that this setting I love more than the setting of Red Dead Redemption 2. And though that game is also an absolute must-play and gem, I think I like Cyberpunk just a tad bit more. But the reason why Cyberpunk does get a lower score is simply because of the many bugs that come with the product. Red Dead 2 was simply a much more finished game, and if they had delayed Cyberpunk just a bit more and had polished it more, then it might have scored above Red Dead 2 on the channel. Since I also like sci-fi more than medieval settings, it comes to no surprise that I like this a lot more than the Witcher games, and I salute you people at CD Projekt Red for making some of your best work yet. I cannot wait to see what you will bring us next, and after 45 hours, I am still enjoying the game immensely, and I'm so happy that I can still spend so much time playing and completing the game from now on.